I'm going to hand over to Peter.
Yes, the reading is from 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning at verse 32. 1 Samuel 17:32. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go up against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered him out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and took over the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. This is the word of the Lord.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. Hello, good morning. My name's Katie, if we haven't met, and I'm part of the team here at Christchurch. And I just want to start by apologizing for my husky voice. We've been away at Focus, and we've had a great time. It was so much fun in the field. We were worshiping together. We had a load of fun. Here's a little pic of our little Christchurch fam, whether or not you're with us. But here we are in a field. But me and a few others in this room apparently are still recovering to get their voices back, struggling to recover their voices. So apologies, but do come with me anyway. And cheeky advert, do come 2026. I'm sure we'll be advertising it soon. But join us there. But we are getting stuck into our summer series. It's August. Summer is officially here. And we are looking at the life of David. So we're looking at 1 and 2 Samuel, and we're going to be uncovering some of the big defining moments in David's life. But more than that, what we're going to be doing is looking at how David's life all points us to Jesus, the true and the anointed king. And today we're stepping into possibly one of the more famous moments in David's life, his battle with Goliath. Even if you've never opened a Bible, you've likely heard this one before. It's a classic underdog wins story. It's often used in sporting analogies or business talk or whatever. It's often known in culture. There's series on TV. I don't know if it's Netflix, but there's definitely a series that everyone has told me to watch. Confession, I haven't watched it. But it's out there. And what we're doing today is we're getting stuck into 1 Samuel 17 that Peter read for us. And we're going to look at what's really going on. What is God saying to us, his people, as we read this text? Because what it isn't just a feel-good, giant-slaying moment. This is about a kind of faith that is radically lived out. A faith that names God and a faith that doesn't stay silent. So, where are we in the narrative of the Bible right now? Let's set the scene, the story so far. We have a bit of a pattern in humanity. And we see it in this story. So right at the beginning, God creates humans. He creates them to live closely with him, to be known by him, to know him, and to walk with him. And then again and again, humans choose their own way over his way. In the garden, we see it happen. In the wilderness, it happens. We see it in the mess that is Judges. It happens then again. No, again there. So it's the same pattern. We're just in a different moment. Again and again, we, humanity, we choose our own way. And this isn't just rule breaking. What this is a breakdown of relationship with God, with a covenant God of faithfulness. And he keeps inviting us back into relationship with him. And then here we are in the story, and Yahweh, God, is offering to be the king of God's people. And they say to him, no thanks. We want the kind of king other nations have, one that looks intimidating, one that represents our people, one that we can see, one that looks the part. So Yahweh, God, he's like, okay, sure, you can have Saul. Saul is strong, Saul is impressive, but he wasn't the king that they actually needed. He's the king that they thought they needed. He's the king that they asked for, but he wasn't what they actually needed. He led with pride, he led in his own strength, and he didn't lead in surrender. So everything's feeling a bit shaky. They have this king. But they're looking for a king who can actually lead. God's people are a bit stuck. They're frozen in fear. They're facing the Philistines on the other side of the valley. And every day, this terrifying figure walks out of the enemy camp. And his name is Goliath. And every day, he walks into the valley and he is shouting, "Send me a man to fight." Day after day, he's mocking God's people. And no one moves. Not Saul, not the army. But David then walks in. He's just a teenager. He's a shepherd. He's not a soldier. He's not old enough to fight. And he's there because he's delivering lunch to his brothers sent by his dad to check on their well-being. And he walks in and he hears these shouts from Goliath, goading them. And David speaks. He says, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistines." What's interesting here, there's a few verses with conversation between David and Saul. And it's David that speaks first. And Walter Brueggemann, a theologian, just notes that this is an important shift in power and authority in the narrative, because usually it would be the king to speak first. Just before, in chapter 16, David's been anointed, but Saul doesn't yet know this. And David comes in, he speaks first, and he says, "Let's go." And then David, what he isn't doing here, this isn't bravado. He's speaking from a promise. He's declaring God's saving power. And Saul's trying to reason with him. We read it before. He says, "You're not able to go. For you are but a youth." And he's saying to him, "You're too small. You're too young. You've never done this before. You don't know what you're doing." David's being disqualified. But David responds with a testimony of faith. "Your servant used to keep sheep. And when there came a lion or a bear, I went after him and I struck him and delivered it out of his mouth." Again, this isn't bravado, this isn't ego. David isn't flexing his fights with all these massive animals. He's sharing a testimony, a witness of what God's done. He's saying, "I know what God can do because I've seen it with my own eyes." He says, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine." David's introducing a pattern of trust here. God has delivered, God will deliver. God has delivered, God will deliver. He's delivered me from He's delivered me from the paw of the bear, and he will deliver me from the hands of the Philistine. And crucially, in this moment, David names Yahweh. Before this, he's spoken of the living God, but here he says outright, Yahweh will deliver. And this matters because up until this point, no one else has spoken God's name. Not Saul, not the army, not David's brothers. And Walter Brueggemann names that this is significant. When David names Yahweh, he's not just invoking a title. It's a covenant of faithfulness with a God of faithfulness. Yahweh is the name of God revealed to Moses at the burning bush. I am. And it carries the promise of faithfulness to the people of God. David isn't just saying God, he's declaring this is a God who keeps his promises, even when we don't. This is covenant theology in action. This is a God of faithfulness. And David knows his name and he's calling on his name. And he refuses to let Yahweh's name be silenced. It's not just about faith. It's about who your faith is in. Where everyone else sees this giant, David knows God and he knows his covenant of faithfulness. When others are frozen and silent, he remembers who's really fighting his battles. So Saul's like, great, let's go then. And he says to him, "Go and the Lord be with you," Saul says. And then Saul clothed David in his armor. So in one breath, he declares trust in God. He says, go, the Lord be with you. And in the next, he tries to control the outcome, leaning more into human strength, saying, put on my armor. It's comical in some ways, but it's also so relatable, isn't it? It sounds a little bit like, I believe that God has this calling on my life, but I'm stressed and anxious over here as I try and figure it out because I don't know what it is in my own human strength. It sounds like, God will provide. I trust that he'll provide. But meanwhile, I'm a bit anxious and I'm working double time trying to get the rainy day savings account looking neat and tidy just in case he doesn't. Or it looks like, I know that I'm free in Christ. I know that he sets me free. Meanwhile, over here, I'm still believing all the lies in my life. Or I'm still looking to prove something and to prove myself. Or perhaps it's God sees me, but I'm desperate to be seen by everyone else because that doesn't feel quite enough. And I think this is what's going on here. It's go, Lord be with you. We trust him. But take my armor just in case. A little bit of human backup. And the armor, this isn't it wasn't evil. The armor's not a massive problem in itself. It just wasn't David's armor. It wasn't his to wear. Saul meant well, I assume anyway, I hope, giving him the benefit of the doubt. But his armor wasn't made for David. It didn't fit. It would have been heavy. It would have slowed him down. It would have perhaps made this teenager look more intimidating. He would have looked the part in this king's armor. But he probably would have lost the fight because he wasn't agile. It was weighing him down and it was slowing him down. And honestly, I think some of us are doing the same thing. We're putting on an armor that wasn't meant for us. And we're walking into battles wearing stuff we were never meant to carry. And I wonder today what armor we've been wearing, what armor we're hiding behind. Maybe it's being the funny one with banter and we're always fine and we're performing this fun look. Or perhaps we're the ones who we're always capable. Everything's under control. It's all put together. But really we're hustling and we're struggling to hide the cracks. Or we're giving our time to good things. We're pouring our time into charities we back, but we're not quite ready to give up our finances to actually back the thing we'll give our time to. Or we're posting about social justice, but we're not letting God do a deep work in our hearts. This isn't freedom. This isn't what God's asking us to do. And today, like David, how he took this armor off, I think we can take this stuff off. We don't get the detail in the passage of how it felt taking that armor off, but I imagine it felt pretty vulnerable in that moment. This teenager going to fight a giant, being given a king's armor, and he took it off. He went without it, and I think that's pretty bold. And I just want to acknowledge in saying, today we can take this armor off. It's probably not going to feel comfortable initially, but we know that there is a better promise. So, David takes off Saul's armor. He picks up his slingshot. He knows who he is, he knows what he's got in his hands, and he walks towards Goliath, who turns and walks to David. And the Philistine looked and he saw David and he disdained him. Well, I always think this line's really funny. He said he looked ruddy and handsome. I love this little detail about David. But what he then goes on to say is, am I a dog? You come to me with sticks. Come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds. It's fighting talk from Goliath. And I think he feels mugged off that he's been sent a shepherd instead of like a king fighter. And David then speaks to Goliath and again declares who God is. Again, he speaks and he says, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into our hands. David isn't here for himself. He's not fighting for applause or for a crown for himself. He is fighting for the glory of Yahweh. When Goliath shouts about weapons, David speaks about Yahweh. He declares the truth of this covenant God. David is the clearest voice, a voice that names God and his power. So David heads into the valley with his 5 stones and a sling. No sword, no shield, no backup. And then 1 stone later, the giant falls. And I think the key here is that David didn't necessarily show up fearless, but he showed up formed by his faithfulness to God. Michael Gladwell says, courage isn't something that you already have that makes you brave. Makes you brave when the tough times start. Courage is what you earn when you've been through the tough times and discover they aren't that tough at all. And I think what's happening for David is he's been formed, he has seen God's faithfulness. Right at the beginning, he has spoken of God's faithfulness, and he walks into this knowing who God is and what he's done. He earned his courage in the hidden places, up when he's looking after the sheep, fighting the bears, which is pretty cool. But David doesn't win because he's impressive. He wins because God is faithful, and he has been faithful to a God of faithfulness. And this is the whole arc in Scripture. God is the one who saves. God is the one who is faithful. And I think there are a few key takeaways that we can have today, looking at the life of David. One is to know the name of Yahweh. Because silence in itself is a statement. The people of God were silent, and David refused to stay quiet. What was happening in the passage we read, Goliath was loud, but God's people were silent. 40 days of taunting, threats from Goliath, and not one person spoke the name of Yahweh. Not Saul, not the soldiers, not David's brothers, but then David shows up, not with a sword, not with height, not with qualifications to fight. He came with a packed lunch for his brothers, but a history with God. And that's when the silence breaks. And in today's passage, we see 2 speeches, and they're both glorifying God. The first one is to Saul. David speaks to Saul from the secret place, a past with God, and says we need to speak up. We need to go. And then to Goliath, he speaks up in the public place. He knows the word of God. He knows the name Yahweh. He knows who God is, what he's done, and what he will do. Both speeches carry one unshakable truth. The battle is the Lord's. It's his battle. Faith is forged in the quiet and the unseen moments, in the secret places when no one's watching. David's testimony, the story we've read today, reminds us that the same God who delivered him from the lion and the bear will deliver him again. And I think for us, there's a challenge. Let our testimonies, the stories of what God has done in our own lives, fuel our faith like they did for David. Our faith is not just the idea of who God is, but that God has been faithful before and he'll be faithful again. We can be like David. We can speak his name boldly and publicly. It can break silence. It can break fear. It can shift the scene of the battlefield. And I imagine it was pretty terrifying and lonely for David, a young shepherd facing like lions and bears alone in a wilderness. I mean, it's a cool story, but I imagine it was pretty scary. There weren't cheering crowds, there wasn't backup, it was just a boy and his God. And I wonder what this looks like for us, where we have those spaces where it's just ours and it's just God's. Quiet moments of God's faithfulness in our life. It may be big, wild moments fighting bears. It might just be in simple moments with a coffee and quiet time with him. God is faithful and he is with us. And we want to know him and be with him. We want to remember the victories of where God showed up for you. We want to let these stories be the things that rise up in our hearts and help break the silence around us as we speak boldly the name of Yahweh. Because when we do, we step into a battle knowing that we're not alone and the Lord is fighting with us and for us. Second takeaway, take off what doesn't fit you. Saul's armor looked impressive. It was big, it was heavy, it was made for a seasoned warrior, and it was made to look impressive. But it just wasn't for David. It wasn't a bad thing, it just wasn't for David. And even though Saul, like I said, we assume meant well in offering it to him, it came from a place of protection, but David had the courage to say, "This isn't mine. This isn't for me." He knew that trying to wear what wasn't made or meant for him would slow him down, weigh him down, and distract him from everything God had. And again, I think our takeaway is, what are we wearing that isn't ours to wear? Is it a faith? Is it like a vision of faith shaped by others that was never really yours? Fueled by rules, performance, expectation, that leave you feeling exhausted? Or are you carrying the weight of expectations from family to be someone you don't feel like you are, or to perform to be who they think you should be? A heavy armor, again, that wasn't meant to fit. Maybe it's a mask of having it all together, hiding your doubts and your fears or your pain because you feel like you have to be strong or you have to be together and okay. Or the pressure to prove your worth, your achievements, your leadership, your job title, your status, whatever that looks like for you, this isn't what we need to wear. And like David, we can all be taking this off. David's story reminds us that sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is take off what doesn't fit us, what wasn't made for us. We can shed the ill-fitting armor of control, fear, and false identity and step into freedom. And that's when we become agile, ready to move where God is leading us, unburdened, authentic, and reliant on him. And this matters because Saul's armor looked strong, but it would have been a weakness in David's hands. Goliath looked invincible, but his size, his confidence, his heavy gear made him slow and made him predictable. David's advantage was knowing the weapons that he carried, who God was, knowing that he could trust God, that he was obedient to God, and he was free to move in what God had actually given him. When we try to wear someone else's armor, whether it's a lifestyle or a mindset or expectations, we become a weak imitation of who God made us to be. But when we embrace our true identity in God and step into his gifts and grace that he's given us, that's where strength lies. Again, what armor are we carrying that doesn't fit? We can trust that God's armor, his spirit, his promises, his grace, his faithfulness, that's what's going to fit us perfectly. And like David, we can walk confidently into the battles as ourselves, knowing who he is. Not as a copy of someone else, but uniquely ourselves. And then the third thing we can learn from David is that the battle belongs to the Lord. David's fight with Goliath wasn't about his own glory. It wasn't about proving his strength or operating in his strength, being brave or smart. David was fighting for the name of God to be known. And he said, in his words, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. This is powerful because it shifts everything. The battle isn't ours to win in our strength, our wisdom, and our effort. It's God's battle, not ours. We don't need to carry the weight of battles on our shoulders. We don't need to be the heroes of the stories. God's fighting on behalf of his people. Our job is to show up in obedience. Our job is to trust him and to let him move in us and through us. And I feel like this is easy to say, and it's easy to maybe agree with. I don't know, up to you if it's easy to agree with. But I feel like it's not easy to always live out. When fear threatens to paralyze us, it's not always easy to remember that God is fighting for us. When challenges feel deeply overwhelming, and we can know that we don't need to carry this alone. When we feel tempted to control every outcome, we can remember David's example. Saul tried to put the armor on him, rely on human strength. But David trusted in God's power. When others doubt or dismiss us, we can stand firm, like David did, knowing that ultimately the battle belongs to the Lord, not human opinions or expectations. It's so tempting to want to control it ourselves. I moved house this weekend, and I had one too many control freak moments where I was like, everything needs to go where I want it to go. Don't touch my stuff while we move it. And we so quickly tip into control and wanting it to be our way. And that's only a trivial example, but I realized how quickly we just want to control things ourselves. We want to hustle harder. We want to prove ourselves. We want to carry more of the fight on our own. It's so hard to actually let go and give it over to God. But David shows us that real faith isn't about being the hero. It's about being a hand that God uses to show his power. Our strength is not our own might. It's his presence in us. And again, what battles are we trying to fight alone? Our giants might not look like Goliath. They might look vastly different. But I wonder what challenges there are in our lives that we're trying to fight without God. How can we step back from trying to control everything, to perfect it ourselves, to fight it ourselves, and instead lean on God's strength and God's power and God's timing? When David stood before Goliath, he stepped forward not because he was fearless or perfect, but because he knew the battle belonged to the Lord. And we are all invited to do the same today, to show up in obedience, to trust more deeply, and to let God fight for us. And I want to say, as we've looked at these three things that can help us learn from the life of David, that this isn't a self-help message of dig deep, fight your giants. This isn't about that at all, because we can't. We can't do this alone. David didn't win because he was impressive, like we've said. He won because God was with him. And David's whole life is pointing forwards to a greater king, a true champion, the one who really stood when no one else would. This is about Jesus. Jesus steps into the field when no one else can. He steps in with surrender, not with armor, but with a cross. Not to win attention, but to win us, his people, his children, back to himself. Like David, Jesus was misunderstood. He was overlooked. He was underestimated. But he is the anointed one. He is the Messiah, the king who doesn't just fight for a moment, but wins the eternal victory. And when David slung a stone, Jesus gave his body. Where Goliath fell face down in the dirt, sin and death are defeated on the cross. Jesus is the true and the better David. So here's the invitation. It's not to try harder. It's not to hustle for faith, but to trust more deeply in him. To stop dressing in armor that doesn't fit us. To stop running from what scares us. To stop stop believing the lie that God has gone quiet, and instead to let the name of the living God be the thing that we speak out. To walk forwards in faith, not because we feel strong, but because he is strong. Because the same God who delivered David has already delivered us in Christ. And today we're invited again to trust him. Today we are invited to follow him and to let him fight for us. So I'm going to invite us to stand as we finish.